the City of Hallandale Beach. And tonight is really a conversation about the Regional Activity Center and the Land Development Regulation. Those are some terms that some of you may or may not be familiar with. Hey Leo, how are you? But we want to be able to start the conversation with the community to be able to share where we are so far in this process of developing the code. So just to give you a little bit of a background in terms of what this is from a mechanic standpoint, and the folks from the regional Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council are going to go through the presentation. But basically, this is a document that guides development within these properties, within that red boundary that you see up on the map. So it's essentially like your roadmap, your guide that tells you what you can and can't do, how you can and cannot do it, and it simplifies the way that development will happen within the Regional Activity Center. So that's really what we're here to discuss. It is intended to provide information to the public. It's part of our process. Anytime that you're going to change any regulatory document, there is a level of public participation that is required, that we encourage, so that people are informed, they know how the changes, proposed changes are going to impact them. And tonight what we really want to do is to share with you what we have so far, to get any feedback, answer any questions that you may have about this process, and be able to, again, just enlighten you with regard to this process. So I'm going to, at this point, introduce Dana Little and Thea. Tell me how to pronounce your last name.
Giniotis.
Giniotis from
Yes.
the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. The city has engaged them to help with developing this document. It is not a document yet, but you're going to see some of the things that are going to help to formulate the document. And hopefully it'll be, as I said, informative to you, helping you to understand how we move from a concept or from an idea to an actual project development or project developments. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anthea, and then she's going to walk us through the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you for coming out on a workday evening. I'm going to turn this just so I can look at it while I'm looking at you. Hang on just a second. Okay, just a quick introduction of who we are. We are Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. We are one of 11 RPCs in the state. Our region is in yellow here. It's actually Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River County. We do collaborate pretty frequently with our sister agency, South Florida, who oversees Broward, Dade, and Monroe counties. We have a long history of providing a pretty wide range of assistance to local governments, which is sometimes we end up on loan to South Florida's region. We've done everything from master plan and visioning work. This is a plan for downtown West Palm Beach around their existing tri-rail station. This is a more refined model of the potential development that could happen there. We've also done this type of work for the City of Riviera Beach, where we took the vision of the master plan and helped them codify that by amending their CRA plan, their comprehensive plan amendments, and their land development code. So we've been asked to come to assist the city with updating their land development code. There was a visioning session, a visioning document that took place called the Citywide Master Plan. Had an extensive public process in 2008 and was adopted in 2009. How many of you in the room actually know what the Citywide Master Plan says? Okay, 1. Okay, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to give a quick recap of that document just so we all know the direction that's been established for the RAC area. So the idea is to start clarifying the land development rules to ensure that development actually realizes the vision that was laid out in that master plan. And the more clear the rules are, the bigger opportunity there is to try to streamline the approval process. This is a community redevelopment area. We want to welcome investment. We want to welcome redevelopment. And one of the important ways to do that, is to make the vision clear and the process as simple as possible. There are public efforts underway for parks and street improvements, and it's important that private investment and public investment all kind of are coordinated and work together to realize a predictable outcome that maximizes everyone's efforts, really. So this is the citywide master plan document. If you don't know what it says, or if you're interested in reading more in depth after you hear my quick overview, it is available on the city's website for download. You simply go to the development services page, and there's a sidebar where you can click on citywide master plan, and you can read it at your leisure, download it, print it, or just read it online. So the master plan established a vision statement for the area that is in the Regional Activity Center. Basically, that this area was to develop as a vibrant, mixed-use, sustainable, pedestrian-oriented urban environment with an appealing character and sense of place. This was the overall vision for what would happen in this area. It lists guiding principles to achieve that vision, creating a vibrant atmosphere, fostering the idea of mixed use, creating a sustainable urban environment. So that's an urban environment where maybe a car isn't needed for every single trip. You have options to walk or bike safely to places. And that there would be a real character and sense of place developed over time as improvements were made. This is an image that all of the images I've been showing you are from that master plan. And you'll notice that when it talks about mixed-use development, it says, okay, mixed-use development fosters walkability. That's true. You can see that there's stores on the ground floor here, and there's either offices or residential above it. But what's also important to notice is that the way that the building is designed, it is shaping the street. There is attractive landscaping. There's maybe a park across the street. There's people and cars sharing the roadway in an environment that is working for all the uses in the picture. So it's beyond mixed use. There's an element of design in these examples that have everything to do with the part that is sense of place and character that is called for. The master plan also points out where the city needs improvement. That the corridors, people are out there walking and biking today, and the environment is not as attractive and conducive to that as it maybe should be. So there are specific ideas in the master plan about how to implement those guiding principles. Some of those are the charge of the public agencies in the mix: wider sidewalks, planting street trees, designing streets so that pedestrian function is given as much consideration as vehicular. Some of the ideas, however, have to do with the private infrastructure that would come in and investment in the form of building facades that frame the street. So it's both of those efforts that have to work together to recast the city. The master plan also includes very specific interventions, and the one that is most the one that is the biggest idea for the area that we're looking at here is the new town center, which would form around Blueston Park. So to help you get oriented, this is Gulfstream. You can see the horse track here, and that's the development. This is Federal. Here's Blueston Park, and here's the Dixie FEC corridor. So the idea would be that this park would develop as a focal point for the town, a congregation area for everyone. It would be framed by mixed-use 4 to 5 story buildings. There would be higher density around the future train station, which is planned to come into this area. There has been some discussion with folks that they think that it's either Hollywood gets a train station or we get a train station. Actually, it was speaking with the RTA. Both communities model very well on their own. There's no reason not to expect that when commuter rail starts in the Tri-Road Coastal Link, that you will eventually have a train station, even if Hollywood also gets one. So that's really important. That's a bit of a game changer for the community in terms of mobility and accessibility to your city. So this is another view looking, here's Gulfstream if you're looking towards it. Federal Highway is back here. This is the Dixie FEC corridor. So taking the components that are already there in terms of the government center, the cultural center, the library, and Gulfstream Village, and then framing that with new investment that's higher density and intensity is an idea. The master plan does a lot of study on height, talks a lot about how to ensure compatibility among buildings of different scales and height, but the general idea is that taller buildings would be located along main thoroughfares. So you'll see that coming through. So the first step in implementing the master plan has already been accomplished by city staff. There is what's called the RAC, the Regional Activity Center. And the boundaries of the RAC are shown here in blue. That's I-95, here comes Hallandale Beach Boulevard, Federal Highway, and the Dixie FEC corridor. Here's Gulfstream over here. So this area, it actually extends beyond our study area. It goes up and includes Foster Road and follows Pembroke Road around the edges there. This is the future land use plan. The RAC is the future land use. That's the mega view of redevelopment. And the area that is shaded in blue is the area that's included in the RAC. This outline in red is the focus area for this effort. So the land development code is the updates and changes are being focused within that red boundary, the core area of the RAC. The future land use says that within all this blue area, we are going to be mixed use, and we're going to have residences, we're going to have commercial businesses, parks, government, light industrial, all of the things that make up a city. And there's a tremendous amount of flexibility in terms of how those uses come together on the ground, which is a really good redevelopment tool because it allows the city to follow the market, to be well positioned to follow whether the market is for residential or whether it's for commercial and office right now or whether somebody wants to build both in a vertical arrangement. So the foundation has been laid to foster the redevelopment of this core area. So the second step is updating the land development code. So why do we need to change the code? Well, if you go to the city's website and you're an outsider and you try to look up the zoning on a parcel, this is what the map looks like to somebody who doesn't know how to navigate it. Certain parcels have maybe 3 different sets of instructions to choose from, some of which might yield the outcome that's desired by the vision, but others which will not ensure that that happens. So, and again, we go back to this idea that the more clear, the more predictable the rules are, the faster the process can be, the more streamlined. And the more predictable the outcome is for property owners and residents that are already in the area. They're able to understand very clearly the scale and intensity of the buildings that are coming in around them. So here's an example. This is one of your neighbors to the north, West Palm Beach. If any of you are familiar with that, this church is now the Harriet Himmel Theater in the center of City Place. This strategy that your city is undertaking has actually proven successful in other cities nearby. This effort started with a master plan, a vision, which you've already accomplished. They changed their comprehensive plan, and then they moved to new land development codes that have created this area, the same church as here, have turned it into this now, with the aid of a CRA, which you also have in play. When the vision was made, keep in mind, we'll go back to this one. There's the church, and you'll see this building, which was a vacant school, at the end of the street. This vision was drafted when everything else was empty. And what came in isn't exactly what the picture showed, but it's really close in scale and intensity. And the reason that that could happen and the predictability was there was they codified the direction so that when private investment came in, it all was working off of the same blueprint and it added up to a new place. So the type of land development code that we're talking about putting into place is termed form-based. Now, all codes result in a form. Form-based codes typically result in a more predictable form. They have maybe a little less attention to use. They allow the mixing of uses, but the way that the mixing of uses is harmoniously realized is that the buildings and the parking and the height and the street design is all controlled so that it works together. So it doesn't matter if the upper floor is office or residential, because it's all coming in a harmonious manner. So here's an example of townhouses. I'm sure they're very nice. The type of instructions that the code that we're working on will result in, though, will make sure that they're actually beginning to turn around, face the street the way that we saw the images in your citywide master plan. And then this developer knows that the person next door or the person across the street, when he redevelops, is going to do the same thing. And so what happens then is that the value is spread beyond the individual parcel, and it starts to move throughout the community in a predictable manner for both investors, residents, and property owners. So we were talking a little bit about private and public investment and their coordination. So here's a crosswalk that ends in this building's drainage field. You know, this guy's biking, so is this a multimodal street? Maybe. Same type of use as an office here on a street that has a sidewalk, has landscaping. And then a third version where a lot of detail has been put into the street and the buildings are invested in framing that street and the park is across it. So it's the idea of starting to activate the street and accommodate those multimodal uses in an attractive environment. And one of the ways that codes that we've worked on in the past have done that is by carefully coordinating minimum and maximum setbacks with the ultimate street design so that the height and the position of the buildings and the ultimate street design works together. So we've been studying the citywide master plan, which is the blueprint, and we've been observing what's going on the street today. And we have a couple of sort of initial observations to offer. This is Hallandale Beach coming through the study area. This is what it looks like last week. It's important to know that nearly 30% of all developed areas are the roadways in any town or city. They are always your front door. So it doesn't matter how many welcome signs are out there greeting you. If it doesn't look inviting, people are not going to invest in your community. They're not going to want to stay in your community. They're just going to move through your community. Here's Pembroke Road, Federal Highway, right at the entry into the rack from the Hollywood side. This is what it looks like today. So how to handle these corridors that have become very vehicular oriented over time. They've widened over time. Sidewalks have gotten more narrow. All of those things have happened throughout our state. This is an image from Military Trail in Palm Beach County. And you can see that if the investment that comes in starts working together with landscaping and building position, and the public infrastructure is improved a little bit, these corridors can begin to be recast. Last year, we did some work on Broward Boulevard, and they have a very similar situation. You can see that some of these buildings are right up on the street. The roadway's been widened over time. They've tried to put in a fancy sidewalk to make it look a little bit better. But it still remains not the best environment where you would choose to walk. So through trying to figure out ways to coordinate with existing property owners, landscaping, restriping the roads, can the view of that corridor begin to be improved? And then ultimately, when redevelopment comes in, use that front setback and the design of that front area to really shift the way that the street is used to be more balanced between bicycles, pedestrians, and cars. Block size, this may not seem too important because there's an existing healthy grid in the study area, but I think it's worth going over because it's the importance of this and the reality of what we were talking about earlier with how choked Hallandale Beach Boulevard can get with traffic and Federal Highway. There are certain sizes of blocks that facilitate walking. There's a point where there's a relief and you can turn and you can go to your neighbor and you can bike and you can move off of a busy street onto a quieter street. Those metrics matter. The this isn't Florida, but it's what we do in Florida out west quite a bit, where we build single uses on lots, on blocks that are so long that you just can't turn or get to your neighbor without going 3,000 feet just to get onto the other street. This matters. This is an image of Miami Beach. Miami Beach accommodates the most tourism in the region, probably. Miami Beach also accommodates a regular residential population and density and businesses, and it's all handled in an environment that is quite lovely because the blocks are small enough that traffic can disperse. People have lots of options of which way they want to walk or move, and bicyclists can all move and get to the beach back and forth through a number of different options. The city doesn't seize up if there's an accident on this road because you simply can move over to the other road. So those blocks networks that you have are important. It's important to protect them and make those changes as investment comes in over time that augments the existing street and block structure. Okay, so here's a mega example of that. This is Wellington. This is a mall. This is a high school. This is all residential. And that's how big the intersection has to be because absolutely nothing connects. No child, I think of any reasonable person that lives here, is ever going to walk across that street to school if you can prevent it. So the way to solve or to ameliorate or to absorb redevelopment in the RAC area without having Hallandale Beach Boulevard and Federal Highway starting to get worse or wider and wider is really to make sure that tertiary system is augmented and stays in place over time. Basically, the rule of thumb is the less connected an area is, the bigger the streets must be. The more connected the area is, the smaller the streets can be. So it's just something to keep track of. Livable streets really are an economic development issue. When streets are framed and they start creating these outdoor rooms, whether through buildings or through landscape design, there is a payoff with higher real estate value. This type of payoff is documented in graphic standards, which is a book produced by the American Institute of Architects. And you can see that the higher the sense of place, the tighter the street section ratio, the higher real estate value tends to be. But there needs to be a balance between going up and out. Height in every community that we work in is a hot button issue. Height can start a fight at 4 stories, it starts at 10, it starts at 20. It really depends on the community and what the general citizen's idea of their community is. We are working also in Delray Beach right now where the height limit is 48 feet, but with certain conditions you can get to 60 feet. They are fighting like you would not believe over 12 feet. It's a big deal. We come into Hallandale, 100 feet, 200 feet, really where's the point where you're uncomfortable? We would just suggest that as this effort moves forward, that in the RAC area there's a tremendous amount of redevelopment that does need to happen, and the market is only going to bear so much over time. And so there has to be a balance between how many projects build up versus out to start filling in and creating that sense of place between different projects. Our initial analysis, and this is just a starting point, taking the citywide master plan's guidance and looking at what's on the street now, we've begun identifying potential districts. So the idea that the taller structures may happen around the corridors, that there may be more intensity to the south, not only to take advantage of the train station that's eventually coming, but also this idea that Blueston Park was going to be that town center. And other areas that are really unique to Hallandale, the Fashion, Art, and Design District, the FAD District, which there seems to be a real nostalgia for the activity that happened in that district in the past. There's also some vested property owners who have a real interest in doing something interesting there. And so we want to be sure that the code supports them and helps them move forward with their vision as well. Lot sizes, the existing entitlements, all of those things are important. For example, you can see that the east side of Federal has very small lots that quickly transition into a very nice neighborhood. Where the west side, the lots are deeper, the redevelopment potential is greater, parking garages and more parking can be accommodated, which might make the buildings more intense. So we're just in the beginning phases of beginning to test that and work through that. And that's basically just letting you know how the project is starting and where we're going. The first draft of the new rules or regulations, we'll be working with staff, and we should have that in March or April. And once there's a formal draft available, it will be put online, and there will be many more workshops. As Daniel stated in the beginning, changes to the rules for private property have a purposefully very public process that they go through. There will be planning board hearings. You will also hear, and now that we have your email addresses, you will be notified of all of them so that you can participate. That's basically where we're starting at this point. We would love to hear whether you have questions, comments, concerns about things that are uses or parking or other things that are happening in the area, whatever you would like to comment on. We'd like to hear from you. That's it.
One question.
Okay, go ahead.
You said you guys are going from a use base to a form base.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, in layman's terms, saying you are taking away the RD12?
No, we will. It may not be called RD12. It depends on how it evolves. Right now, RD12 allows you to have 12 units to the acre and has very specific uses. We will be making sure, especially in those residential districts, that the density that you're expecting remains in place. The residential districts maybe are not as, they're affected more by the type of images that I was showing of the townhouses and how they would turn around and work together, how parking would be located, but there wouldn't be a shift in decreasing density that's already on a property. If you had multifamily, you're not suddenly going to have a single family house. You know, it would very much be a balance between existing property rights and then just trying to see what can happen as street design improvements are designed and all of that.
And Bill, would you just, for purposes of just making sure everybody understands, could you just explain what density means in very simple terms? Okay,
so RD12 means that you can have 12 units per acre on your property. I'm going to keep looking at city staff because they're the experts in the room. So there is no effort here to reduce the density that you already have in place. It's more of an effort to shape the buildings so that parking is located in a certain way and that the fronts of buildings face each other so we don't end up with the front of a house facing the back of somebody else's house. You know, really just trying to coordinate how development would arrange itself, because everybody's a different property owner, they have a different timeline, they might be happy with what they have with no intention to change, others might be ready to redevelop. So it's really just trying to ensure that the redevelopment that happens has as few growing pains to existing property as possible, but then all starts to organize itself over time to achieve the visions that were in that document.
My question was, because just looking at the boundaries, I know we just purchased some bare land over there with our own vision.
Right.
And I don't want to see that interrupted saying, well, now that you think you're going to buy some, your plan was to build this certain building. Now, if we've done a redevelopment, now you can't build what you expected to build what we bought the land for.
Okay.
Our purpose was to build some duplexes there.
Okay. And so you're in the RD12, which is that the duplex zone? Okay.
Right.
I don't think that was changing very much. But this process, actually, because of the long sort of public process, we are going to be coming back to you over and over again through October, I think, is the goal for adoption. If your timeline is faster, staff is going to be sure that we're working with you. You're not going to have to wait. You know, and if you're in the process for approving something, you're not going to be standing at the dais ready to get your second reading approved and get handed a new set of rules. We're in that sort of in-between mode where there is a vision. Part of why we're reminding or informing for the first time that there's a citywide master plan is so that new investors and people can look at that document from 2009 and sort of understand the direction that the city was trying to go as you're making plans. But the rules will not shift on you in the middle of an approval if at all possible. And it's a hinky area, I get you're concerned, and that's part of why the city's having these workshops, so that as many people as possible kind of know that changes are in the works. But, you know, they'll work with you. It may be sort of a case-by-case basis for people who are in the middle of a project. But
We had if I may add too, I'm sorry, my name's Dana Little, I'm with Treasure Coast. But we had an earlier presentation this morning with some larger projects that were in discussion, and it's the same thing, you know, projects that are sort of in the pipeline already, maybe not completely designed, but, you know, we encourage with staff and certainly Daniel that, you know, to work with staff and us to make sure that, you know, your property rights, first of all, are protected. But also because we'll learn from that process too, like where there are some issues with the code. I know one thing that we're trying very hard is to pay attention to the transitions of this sort of central core area to the neighborhoods. Anthea mentioned you don't want to have, you know, the back of one house face the front of another house. Well, even worse than that, you don't want to have a new development have their dumpsters facing your house. So when we talk about form-based code, it's really thinking about how those things work. It's not just RD 12 or commercial 9 or whatever with very little thought about how the buildings actually work. Buildings have fronts and backs, and that's really important. And so the transition, I just wanted to add that. The transition from, even though we're officially looking inside the red boundary, we know that the transitions into the neighborhoods are something that's very important. Part of this as well.
Beyond that, it's also the identification of primary streets and secondary streets in regard to where we want certain things and certain types of developments, where they are more appropriate.
right, one of the tools that will likely come out of this that we recommend for cities is that, you know, this is a city that has all kinds of uses in it, and some of them are messy, and that's the reality of a city. This isn't a development. This is a real place. And so one of the tools that has been very effective in other places is to say, well, this is a primary street, and this is a secondary street. And so you put the front of your building facing the primary street. And if you've got to have service uses, they go on the secondary street. And then the guy next door to you knows he does the same thing, so that it all starts to add up together, and those main routes get reinforced. You know, there are uses that, you know, some people that are desiring a pedestrian-oriented community, you know, would tell you are not compatible, like a drive-through. Well, again, this is a real city, and, you know, we all go to the bank in our pajamas occasionally, and we don't want to get out. And so that's okay. It's just those uses need to happen. Maybe we don't all go to the bank in our pajamas. Maybe it's just me. But I don't get out of the car. So I just put my hand out the window. But you know, so those types of uses can happen. It's just you don't want that happening next to your beautiful Main Street cafe. You just need to have the drive-through facing the other street so that the front, you know, so it's really just a matter of giving tools to organize how different property owners with different visions can all, you know, work together to sort of achieve a predictable outcome for everyone.
That's I think the key word to this whole thing is that to try to refine the code that exists today. Not through anyone's fault or through any malice, but over time, you know, changes occur and you get layers and layers. And so once in a while, it's good to just sort of step back, assess it, find out what's really important, and make it more understandable, clear, and predictable. So that you have a good idea what your neighbors, you're not going to wake up to some monstrosity across the street, you know, without ever having realized that, you know, that was potential.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I'm looking at over there, how many homes do you talk about?
Well,
Going to be affected?
the property within the red boundary may at the end be rezoned to a new district. It doesn't mean that the district will be less restrictive. In fact, the point of a RAC is to actually provide a more flexible ability. There's property out there now that can only have commercial, and you can't have residential on an upper story if you wanted to. You know, not that mixed use is always vertical, but, you know, cities and towns can accomplish a wide range of options. And, you know, those are the kinds of things where there will be a less focus on maybe listing every single use. And this happens in every code, and particularly in Florida. We are a boom and a bust state. which means when we're booming, your staff is living out of their inboxes, they're working late, they're trying to keep up, and when we're busting, you're laying them off. So nobody gets time to clean out the closets. And so every now and then with regulations, it's really important that you take a minute and you assess and make sure that the instructions that are being given to the folks that come into your community are going to give you what you want. And since the effort was taken in 2008 and 2009 to define where the city wants to go, now you have a CRA that's starting to work on how streets and properties and parks are going to be redeveloped. The private sector needs to be contributing to that same vision, and that's quite frankly good for everyone because it raises value over time. So it makes a livable place, or maybe you don't need a car for every last thing. Yes.
First off, I hope that in the future, at your future meetings, you guys are going to be prepared to deal with some very constructive criticism of how things have been here. And it's great to talk about flexibility. But one of the things about flexibility is, of course, the city willing to admit when they've made mistakes too, and didn't listen to the public. The specific area that you're talking about, the so-called town center part, was actually one of the least popular of all the various plans of the master plan that was composed. One of the reasons being because when Gulfstream Park discussed their plans for the retail complex, they of course ended up talking about that being the new town center. Now obviously everyone can distinguish between something that's retail, for instance up in Palm Beach, versus something where 99% of Palm Beach County actually lives, understanding that everyone isn't going to be spending time going to a jewelry store every day. But part of the problem here is also the fact that the intertransportation and frankly just getting staffers to acknowledge when they're wrong and the public is right. I mean, the people who are actually citizens of the community who are actually here, and by the way, you guys need to do a much better job of letting people know about the meetings. I'm very involved in the city. Only found out about this meeting this afternoon, and I can tell you there's a message board over on Hallandale Beach Boulevard that's been advertising the Powell Antique Show that was over 2 days ago. That's still up. So maybe the city actually using the resources they have to better effect would be a big improvement. But very, very small things that are quality of life. For instance, the fact that over near the largest store of the city, which is the Walmart, there's not a bus shelter. How do you explain that all these years later there isn't one? How do you explain the fact that the city taxpayers spent millions of dollars for that addition on Old Dixie next to Blueston Park, yet the city is no closer to making a decision about what's happened with all those millions of dollars? The old city hall was an eyesore for years. The people who lived in that neighborhood every day had to walk out of their house and see graffiti across the street from them, see people dumping things. The city would ignore stuff like that for weeks and months at a time. In fact, now that they've actually hired, a company's been hired to actually knock down the building, you can actually see even more graffiti. There's actually more graffiti on the building now than there was last year or 2 years ago. So there's a whole host of things, including code compliance. There's lots of businesses. I mean, I don't expect the staffers to tell you this. There's lots of businesses in this community that seem to have a get out of jail pass with code compliance. I can name about half dozen. I won't do it now, but I can tell you there's quite a number of them. It's very egregious, and many of them are actually very close to this building. And no matter how obvious things are, these firms and these businesses continue to get a pass. The same as far as the direction, for instance, you were talking about the area over near Fashion Row. I've been a strong supporter of that, but have not been at all happy with the way things have developed over the last few years. There's been improper communication, and frankly, larger developers actually take advantage of the fact that there's very poor communication between people who are neighbors. Part of that is obviously because everyone doesn't necessarily own the property that their shop is located in. And obviously larger people take advantage of it. I've been a strong proponent of transportation, specifically what is now being called the Tri-Rail Coastal. But I can tell you for years, I provided the former city managers with information from the very people who are involved in the South Florida East Coast transit corridor study.
SFECC.
Continually in public meetings, not so much like this, but at other meetings, they would get that information and misrepresent it. And then when I would point out what the actual facts were, they would say that I misunderstood it. All I was doing was presenting information from the person in charge. I couldn't attest to its accuracy. And again, even now, all these years later, the public still isn't sure. Is the Tri-Rail station going to be off over 3rd Street? Is it going to be closer to Hallandale Beach Boulevard? If it's close to Hallandale Beach Boulevard, that creates traffic problems, and there's already traffic problems here. So having closer to 3rd makes more sense. But on the other hand, there's no sidewalk connecting from the railroad tracks Over here to US one, half of that area has no sidewalks at all,
Mm-hmm.
and has a very, very narrow area, and the road is already small enough, one lane in each direction, and it's also poorly lit. So I'm a big fan of living in cities that have these sort of things. I went to all the Siskovich meetings up in Hollywood when they were redoing their master plan. All these ideas are great, but they're gonna fail if the public doesn't feel that they can actually give you their input, and that something is actually gonna be done with that, and the mistakes that the city has made since 2008, 2009 are actually rectified, and that the city staffers who are directly responsible for those actually do their job appropriately and actually satisfy the community. Because the community in the end has to buy into it. Because it's great to have this plan to say that there's going to be a draft and it's going to go to the city commission. If the community doesn't buy into it, it just becomes another piece of paper that exists in a door, in a shelf somewhere in this city. And quite frankly, this city has got enough projects, enough presentations that have never seen the light of day. And people in this room have participated in those meetings wondering to what effect? Where is the actual positive difference? You know, passing laws that don't seem to have any effect at all. Like I said, I hope you guys can do a better job. If you actually have those dates for when those meetings are, I'd appreciate it if you could let me know before the end of the night, and I'd be happy to publicize it to people I know. That way you can get a larger turnout, because like I said, I only found out about this afternoon, and you know, I was obviously hoping for a larger crowd, but it is what it is on a Wednesday night. But clearly you need a lot more people to be able to get the good ideas. Because this community is full of good ideas. People really want this town to be better than it is.
Okay.
They feel very hamstrung with the way things are done here at the city, and also wondering what's the purpose of giving input if nothing's going to come from it.
On that note, I want to make sure that we do have, I don't know where the sign-in sheet is. Okay, it's in the front, so before you all leave, if you have not signed in, we definitely want to make sure we get your contact information. Please legibly write your email address, because we definitely want to be able to communicate with you and you with us. So it's really, really important that we get your contact information there.
I don't want to get away too far from the actual right discussion, but I do want to address what the young gentleman was saying in the back there. Is there a forum to the city that you can express those concerns that we have as the public? As you move along with this project, you know, there's other questions I have concerns too, as far as the public, as far as you know, employment, you know, job opportunities that I would like to address, but I don't want to. I'm sure this is probably not the right forum for
Well,
that.
let me address the issue of engagement on a whole level. As it relates to this process, this is one of, as Via mentioned, one of many workshops or public participation meetings that we will have. Every meeting, whether it's our planning and zoning board or whether it's our city commission, are all open to the public. They all have public comment periods as a part of the meeting. So in every meeting that the city conducts business, or whether it's an advisory committee, the public is always invited and always has an opportunity to talk about anything that may be on the agenda or anything that they may want to comment on or ask questions about. But I think that that is really, you know, the overarching effort that the city makes is always to be able to do that. Beyond that, beyond those meetings, you always have an audience. I think our commission is extremely available and accessible either by phone, in person, or by email, as well as staff. The manager's office, we are pretty much available to serve the residents. If there's ever a question about any specific thing, there's always going to be a response. Now, that may not necessarily give people the responses that they may want, but ultimately you always have an opportunity to be able to communicate. The other deputy city manager, Nydia Raffles, is here. And she has been here longer than I have and can tell you that that is pretty much a priority for this administration, is to make sure that we communicate back the information, whether it's a question, a comment, or anything that we can help to provide information on. So you have multiple opportunities to be able to talk to those that make the laws and the administration that recommends procedures and policies to that lawmaking body.
Okay, and just with those opportunities, I can get with on the city website or page and find out when these meetings are happening, and I can just join them in voice by after voice.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Or I can see you guys on the street or whatever. make an appointment, whatever.
Well, the comments tonight, the ones that have been made, are being taken in, so this is not in vain. Everything that you all have expressed, that's the reason why we're here. But beyond that, once we actually have the document in draft form, we will have another forum where people will be able to talk about specifically what is being recommended. Because ultimately, whatever this organization does and whatever staff looks at is still a recommendation. There's still a body that has to look at that code document and say, we will accept it. And again, so the public always has opportunities to have commentary on what is being proposed.
So has it been decided that all the future meetings are going to be here, or are they going to be different parts of the city?
We haven't decided that yet. We haven't decided that yet, and we're certainly always open to being amenable to where we have it. One of the challenges for us, quite honestly, is the aspect of space and, having availability. So anytime that we have a meeting that is scheduled, sometimes it's a challenge. We have a meeting here tomorrow night on a project not involving within Iraq, it's on Diana Drive, but the last time that we had the meeting with those residents, we were in a cramped meeting room in one of the apartment buildings, and literally it was a kind of a sardine can. And so while this location is not the most ideal, it does afford the maximum amount of space. So those are the challenges that we also face.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question regarding the commercial development component of the plan.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if, through the course of your developing this plan, if you've established a type of profile which indicates what type of commercial mix you're anticipating with this zoning strategy. I mean, your mix regarding retail, manufacturing,
Right.
office, et cetera.
Right. Well, okay, so I think this is a very important distinction, and this is really important for property owners to understand. What's being developed at this point is not a vision plan. This is actually going into the land development code that says you can build 12 units to the acre right now, and making adjustments in terms of how much landscaping you're putting in, how tall your building can be, where's the parking, things like that. These are the rules that guide property development. And so it's more important than a vision plan because it is going to affect your property value, property rights, all of those things. We are pledging to make sure you stay whole through the process. When it talks about commercial redevelopment, when we talk about that type of thing, right now the code is very specific. It's the way codes were done historically over time, that you can have a bookstore and you can have a restaurant and you can have, there's a list. And what we've learned over time, especially as many toxic, uses that used to be in our cities, are no longer even in our cities as advancements have been made, is that it's not as important to worry about the bank being next door to the restaurant. That there's many of those uses that can be collapsed and they're all allowed, and if you want to build them, great, here's how it should be done. So there's some simplification of those long use lists. And the good thing about that is that it basically positions the city really well in the future, for how markets move. Right now there's a big market for office. I'm not saying there really is, I'm just saying. And then, later on there's a stronger market for retail. And if the code is set up to sort of welcome all of those different uses, provided that they arrange themselves compatibly and they're good neighbors, then you're kind of cooking with gas then. You're able to keep moving and redevelop. There are some uses, you mentioned manufacturing. There's uses that auto body, where maybe it's loud, or there's painting, or those are the kinds of uses you really do have to be careful that you're not putting them next door to people's houses. So there will be some care with that. There already is care with that in the code, but just a way to position the city to welcome a wide range of those commercial uses, so that
I have an example, and maybe this is, I don't know if it's a good one, but in the city of Coral Gables, if you go to downtown Coral Gables, you'll find what looks like a really nice building, but it's actually a parking garage. And the way that they frame the garage by code, because the city requires it, they don't necessarily look like a parking structure. So their public parking is an allowed use, but what the city has done is that they have dictated how the exterior of the building will look, so that it does allow for, as Anthea was mentioning, you can have a parking garage next to a beauty salon or a restaurant, and it all looks like it works together, because the way that the exterior has been identified, the developer or the builder of that structure understands this is what they would need to do if they wanted to put that particular use on that site.
Can I dovetail off of that last really good question
Mhm.
she asked, which I thought was an excellent one, is to what extent, and it's been mentioned at a couple of meetings over the last 6 to 9 months, but one of the things that everybody in town knows is that the city really hasn't done enough to really encourage the sort of medical and professional buildings that you
Mhm.
see on both sides of what for us, well, actually for them, is East Dixie Highway and Dixie Highway, where Aventura is.
Right.
Before you get up to the county line, you see all these very
Right.
nice professional buildings, and all of a sudden you hit Hallandale Beach, and all
Right.
of a sudden it's one story, and you're not even exactly sure what the business is.
And why can't you pull those in?
Well,
Right.
not only why
Right.
can't you do that, but also the fact is, like I said, I'm a strong supporter of transit, and I was even telling someone today, if you look at the area where Hollywood Station is, on the southwest corner of Hollywood Boulevard and Dixie Highway, there's no logical reason why you can't have something perhaps more attractive than that, half or 3/4 of that size, but every second or third block, once you get south of Pembroke Road, with the exception of a couple places where it's obviously very residential, and especially the areas that are between Hallandale Beach Boulevard and the county line. There's businesses that
So right here.
are empty, that there's been nothing there for years. And
Where
I,
is
for
he?
one, would certainly rather,
You're talking about the Dixie corridor.
Dixie here?
Corridor, right?
right.
Here?
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
The whole idea of transit-oriented corridors, and the whole idea that rather than forcing all the tall buildings be over on the beach or on Hallandale Beach Boulevard, which increase the traffic for the two of the 3 streets, which is already failing grade, why not actually imagine that you can tell people realistically, we know that within 3 to 4 years, there's going to be a station within some proximity here, maybe not exactly across the street, but close enough for walking. As a person who lived in Washington, who walked 3/4 of a mile to get to the metro station, I can tell you that it really makes a difference for the retail mix when you actually obviously have that link to transit, because people are willing to pay a little bit more. to
Absolutely.
have that, especially if, like me at the time, they didn't have a car, you're paying a premium. It seems to me that it would make perfect sense for
This-
people to be in that area who either work in the downtown Fort Lauderdale area or the downtown Miami area, because all of a sudden, they end up having more freedom, whether it's people selling cars who already have them, or perhaps using the cars a little bit less, when you actually have those retail components that are near people, because there's a large enough economies of scale to actually make it legitimate, say for this lady over here, to decide, you know what, I don't want to build something in the existing neighborhoods, but as soon as there's something that's transit-oriented there, I know that I'm going to have lots of people who have jobs, who are spending money, and I want some of their money selling whatever it is that I'm selling, whether it's a product or whether it's a service. That's how you end up doing it, and that doesn't necessarily help the medical technology aspect, but on the other hand, if you've got people in their 20s and 30s who are medical professionals or are somehow involved in that, and or pharmaceuticals, all of a sudden you're creating a new area for them to discover, one that doesn't already exist. And that's why my concern was that the rack as such seemed in some ways, even though you guys keep saying that it's flexible, it seems to me in some ways is sort of saying, here's what's going to happen and this is going to happen. But I think you have to allow for some things to simply develop dynamically, albeit really pushing hard to make it seem like it's just a coincidence. And that's been part of my concern. There's so many places in the city that I think should have more development than they do, and yet I see only 1 or 2 areas that seem to get the focus. But I think other people see that and wonder why aren't things spread out a little bit more evenly? Because, I mean, just to use one example, I mean, it's embarrassing to me that from Atlantic Shores going south on US 1 until you basically get to 3rd or even a little bit farther south of that, there's so many areas. I mean, that's one of the 3 main streets in the city.
Okay,
The city should be making millions of dollars in taxes off those properties, and there's nothing. There's block after block of nothing there.
And if I could try to address that a little bit, I think we're on the same page, certainly in terms of transit-oriented development, getting a flexible mix of uses. The idea of the code is to discipline the new buildings that come in so that they do create walkable streets, that the streetscape is disciplined, so that you have street trees, so that your sidewalks are 3 feet wide, you know, all of those things, that the parking is in the right
Yeah,
place.
and I'm in agreement with that. We need
But-
to let the developers know that these opportunities are going to be there, it's simply waiting for them to discover, oh, how about this?
But
Right.
David, you know, and this is my opinion, I think that one of the biggest hurdles is this slide here, because this is really what a developer will see. And the reason why development doesn't happen, because if you look at that, you're thinking, how do I figure this out? And oftentimes what a developer with resources will do is if they encounter this on a particular community's website, they will go to another
They go to
community where
Hollywood.
it's a little
They
bit
go to
easier to
Aventura.
understand and they know
That's
what
what we
to.
need to be the logical alternative to Hollywood and Aventura.
And-
For businesses that can't afford either, but find us close enough because we have the proximity.
And
to
that's,
the
and that's
beach
precisely what,
and
that's
the
precisely what this process is intending on doing, to simplify what this is to something that is much more, and I think Dana and Anthea mentioned it earlier, much more predictable. So that you know what you can do, you know how high you can go, you know how many parking spaces you need to provide, you're gonna know how much landscaping you're gonna need to provide on the front. So it's much easier for you to make that development decision, and if you're trying to redevelop, it's much easier for you to be able to do that. So I think you're right on point, and this is exactly the reason why it doesn't happen. I think this is the most powerful slide on the.
Not to pat myself on the back, but I can tell you, because I was at the meetings up in Hollywood actually 2 years ago when I did it. Berry University, the city gave Berry University a former fire station that's located on what for them is North 21st Street. It's a pretty good location. It's just a block or so north of Hollywood Boulevard. So in that sense, the location is great. And they ended up making it, I don't know if it was a continuing college or what, but there's a couple hundred students that go there. But almost none of the students who go there actually live there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for me to understand, for instance, I don't know what FAU has in terms of its various programs versus FIU versus the various other schools. But I know with the Ziskovich meetings up in Hollywood, one of the things they were always trying to hook onto was the idea of having a Hollywood campus of one of the colleges that was a new or emerging technology, where, quite frankly, teenagers and people in their 20s would be very excited and think that sounds like something I'm interested in, and actually live near there as opposed to driving a half hour to school every morning. And I guess I don't quite understand why Hallandale Beach can't have something similar to that in that transit-oriented corridor, where you can completely change the dynamic of the area. Instead of making it sleepy and kind of backwards, you could actually make it seem, well, just the opposite of backwards and sleepy.
We are absolutely trying to do that.
I think you're right on target with your comments on TOD, absolutely. Does anybody else have a question or comment? Okay, Hattie.
I understand the rack concept and the pedestrians, the sidewalks, and we going up higher on the buildings. And to me,
Maybe not. Yeah.
that sounds like more people.
Mm-hmm.
The population's gonna get higher.
Mm-hmm.
With more people, the traffic situation on Hallandale Beach Boulevard right now is horrible.
But these
I
people will
don't-
live here, they won't just drive through. You know,
Right,
that's the
but
thing, everybody
but that's
just drives.
actually, I'm glad you're bringing that up, because that's part of the reason that I spent a lot of time talking about streets and blocks and showing you that blown out suburban. That's gold-plated, brand new development. It's a lot newer than what we're looking at in the city of Hallandale now, and it is those horrible corridors. That's part of why it's important that those local streets and those connections are happening. But the other thing that happens is, and it's a bit counterintuitive, is the more residents, as the people that are actually living downtown, the kind of development that he's talking about, where you've got somebody who maybe works in Miami, but they're hopping on the train to go south, or the more density that comes up around the park, are going to actually foster the businesses that do what we call trip capture, which basically means you don't have to get onto Hallandale Beach Boulevard or Federal to get everything you need every day. That you actually are able to, find those uses much closer to you. Some of that actually happens here. It's happening despite the fact that people are running across a 6-lane corridor to accomplish it. And so I think there's a real opportunity because of how big the rack area is, that those types of uses, if they can start locating in some logical fashion, what happens is that you don't have to get on Hallandale Beach to get to I-95 for your daily commute. When the Tri-Rail Coaster Link comes in, and the SFECC study has been going on for 5 or 6 years, and while what's in the news right now that we hear about is All Aboard Florida, which is not stopping here, let me be clear, All Aboard Florida is going Miami, it's going to Fort Lauderdale, it's going to West Palm Beach, it's going to Orlando, but what it's doing, and that is so important, is it is putting passenger rail back on Flagler's Railroad. It's putting it back on the FEC, and once that seal is broken, then we start getting, a commuter system that the rest of us who are not going to Disney are going to use, you know? And so, and that's a game changer, because what happens is that everybody that's getting on Hallandale Beach Boulevard right now to get to I-95, some of those folks, not all of them, but some of those folks are going to have a new option. And if you get enough density and intensity in the city as a whole, some of those people are going to find jobs closer to home that they don't have to get out there. So that's part of, but that's the concern, is the balance.
Well, I
New
hear you,
people,
but-
new businesses, but it's hard. I mean, I'm going to have to leave and get on that road too to go home, and I hear you.
I feel bad.
I hear
There's
you.
things too that, while it's not really in our scope, we've heard enough about it to discuss and partner with the city and the CRA to help change if that's the desire, but Dixie Highway. You know, there's no reason that Dixie Highway needs to be one way in each direction. You know, we've
It's-
heard from shop owners, and we know this from, you know, one-way streets across the country. You know, if you've got a one-way street in front of your store, you're only getting half the traffic. And if I miss the store that I'm going to, I gotta go 3/4 of a mile or whatever to turn
Loop
around and come
back.
back if I've got the patience to do that. Now, I know that this is a battle that the city has been.
In a railroad track.
Yeah, and a railroad.
So,
Right.
what I think the point of the block size and the streets and the things like this, and this is us giving advice to the city as well, do no harm. You know, as you start to redevelop and you start to see things pick up again, protect your streets, protect your rights of way, and do what you can to make the dispersion of traffic work best. And part of that is Dixie Highway.
It doesn't mean you can't make adjustments. That might need to happen depending on the development that's coming in. But and you know, we're talking as much to your staff and leadership as we are to you. We're just saying, just remember, you've got to keep those optional local avenues out for everybody else who's here who knows how to get to lunch without having to get on Hallandale Beach Boulevard.
I don't go on Hallandale Beach Boulevard
Right.
ever.
Eddie, yeah, she told me. I never go.
Ever.
I can do the whole trip without hitting it, so
Yes,
we have to
every-
follow
I buy
her.
everything in Hallandale. I don't buy anything anywhere else.
Yeah.
So-
And that's any time of the day.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Question, how much of the discussions is FDOT being included with? Because to me,
Right.
a lot of the things that you want to do are great, but until you have the infrastructure in place,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have developers flipping the coin as to
Right.
what's the best location.
Well, there are some streets, like Hallandale Beach Boulevard, like Dixie, that FDOT has to be in the conversation about. They have the ultimate decision on what happens on those rights of ways. And so when we talk about whether, you know, that intersection of Hallandale and Dixie and the railroad track and the other street would work better if it was a two-way system, that is a conversation the city has with FDOT every 3 or 4 years. To be honest, FDOT is evolving pretty rapidly from an agency that I think it's fair to say was mostly interested in moving cars as quickly as possible. Just, you know, there's all kinds of cartoons how to pave through a city to make traffic alleviate. They are going through a paradigm shift where they are beginning to diversify transportation, not cars, to start including other modes. And so, you know, the hope is that some of those efforts may have fallen flat in past years, maybe a new audience, may not be, may have to keep trying. But the other part of it is that you can control what comes up next to it outside of FDOT. You know, so maybe the street tree that you would really like to put between the sidewalk and the curb, they're not going to let you do because it's not more than 5 feet out of the swept path of whatever the rule is. Well, maybe that tree then gets planted in the front setback of the new development that comes in so that you still achieve it even if you're having to do it outside of the corridor. But there are other streets. The bulk of the streets in this area are local streets. The CRA and the city have they're about to finish an RFP for a complete streets effort, which will go through and find those where the sidewalk ends. You know, this doesn't connect here. This is important, and help prioritize how those improvements can get made over time in a capital way. And so there is that sort of a parallel effort. We are not doing that effort, but we will be coordinating with it. So, you know, there's Federal and Dixie and Hallandale, but there's a whole lot of other streets in there that the city has a tremendous amount of purview over.
If I, just quickly, I'll just add though, it not only has the DOT been evolving, but Broward County has one of the most progressive MPOs, Metropolitan Planning
Yes.
Organizations, in the state of Florida. Metropolitan Planning Organizations, they do the long range and short range transportation planning for Broward County. They are instrumental in getting the WAVE in Fort Lauderdale, linking the WAVE to Tri-Rail. Their long-range transportation plan for 2035, their mission was, we are moving away from funding automobiles and you know, they are focused on transit. Broward County's built out. You know, there's no more room to put more lanes. So, you know, focusing on, I'm saying this only because it's not just DOT, but it's the MPO.
Yes.
There's a lot of bright people that are getting it. And I think that, you know, I know that there's been a history of having this discussion about, you know, Dixie. Look at what's happened at Delray Beach. Delray Beach was able to remove a lane in each direction of US Highway 1. You know, it's a different condition there. It's a one-way sort of deal, but they're moving, they're understanding that it's not just cars and roads, but there's people and buildings, et cetera. Community.
But I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I also think that part of this process, to get back to this, really helps have that conversation with those organizations. Because it shows that the city is serious about what we're trying to do. So to approach that agency to say, we want this changed, without going through this process and really putting in the work on our side, really limits how far that conversation is going to go. But by demonstrating that we are really serious about the type of redevelopment and how we want it to look, now the attention, if you will, is much greater as a result of the efforts that we're putting forward.
And our agency has actually done a tremendous amount of work on the SFECC, the South Florida East Coast Corridor Study, in our region, in Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie County. It actually only affects Palm Beach in our area, but because the train hinks. But we went through each of the communities because we found out that whether or not you get a station and your accessibility to federal grants to help pay for some of that stuff has everything to do with whether your land uses are in order around your station area. Because quite frankly, these things are expensive and they're not going to stop the train if you're sitting in, 6 Ds per acre of single family houses and maybe you've only got about 200 people. They're stopping where that infrastructure has to work in the communities that are going to use it the most. So the fact that your staff and your city has already taken these steps of establishing citywide master plan, whether the end document, was what everyone hoped for or not, it is the document that was adopted. And they've done the RAC, which sets up the city very well for that activity zone, that activity center, which, the land uses are, all of that is getting in order to make the city very competitive for getting, one of the first cracks at that type of transit, what we call premium transit. There's different levels of transit. There's the transit you have to take because you have no other choice, and there's the transit that you look forward and you choose to take because you're going to read your newspaper on the way to work instead of sit on I-95. So, really, I know that sometimes progress in cities is hard and leadership changes, but the direction that the city is starting to slowly, methodically move through, really is moving towards the type of environment that you're talking about. So.
Yeah, the timeline from adopting this vision to where you see this vision actually coming to fruition, is it a 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan?
Well, it's a tricky question because what we're working on is putting the rules in place so that when private investment happens, it contributes a step towards that direction. That's really the part of this mission, the Complete Streets effort. That's something else that a separate project that I don't know if you want to jump in on. I can tell you that the terrible sort of national real estate adjustment that we've all weathered seems to be turning. There are a number of developers that are beginning to become interested in Hallandale, which means your staff's going to be booming again if they haven't gotten a break yet. So
Jane, and for everyone, I think that the important point is that this is essentially a document that serves as a guide. It happens in one of two ways. Either the private market does it in terms of properties that they control, or the public does it in terms of properties that we control. The CRA has several properties that it controls that it will be redeveloping. One of the things that the CRA will be doing is redeveloping in accordance with these established guidelines, so that we are essentially saying to the private sector, this is what we want the property and the development to look like. In addition to that, on the public side, we're also doing our complete streets effort, where on the rights of way, we're putting in the sidewalks, the bike paths, the landscaping, the lighting, making sure that the infrastructure is there. That's also a public investment. And between those things and having now the guiding document, that sends a message to the private sector to say, you know, this is the place where we want you to come and develop. Look at what we've done, look at our investment, and join us in this effort.
Yeah. Look how clear and simple what we want to do is, and you have CRA tools, which is also huge. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is, I guess, a little bit away from your rec area, but the area, you said that is flexible, so it'll coordinate off on some of the neighboring areas. But is there gonna be any more towards developing of the areas that are outside of that? Because if you put all of the beautiful trees and all of the nice drive, you know, streets and all of that into just that area, then you ignore the other neighboring areas, and then some of those developments that are there that are incorrect already also.
Well, the Complete Streets effort is a citywide effort.
Okay.
So the effort in terms of what we're going to do on the public right-of-way, in terms of roadway, sidewalks, trees, lighting, et cetera, is a citywide effort. So just to explain how that works, we will go through and do a comprehensive, I'm simplifying it, it's not this simple, but we basically will do an assessment of the entire infrastructure in the entire city and determine a order of priority. What's the worst to what doesn't need much effort. And based upon that order of priority, then through our budgeting process, we then now begin to identify and allocate the capital resources to begin to tackle that, that schedule in that order of priority. So that process, the Complete Streets, is citywide. It's not limited to just the RAP. It is for the entire city limits.
Back on what she was saying about the new businesses and the new infrastructure that's gonna come in, where you would have someone's dumpster not in someone's front yard, or a school playground not in someone's front yard. Those that are existing already in the city, that are like that. I mean, you know, the new stuff coming in, that'd be good, but if you still have the existing wrongs there, are they, I guess that's.
Gonna correct those.
Is the whole thing gonna come together, I should say?
Well, eventually it will. And I say eventually because that's the reality. I would love to tell you that, you know, we're gonna pass this document and we're gonna wave a magic wand and all of a sudden everybody's gonna wake up the next
Well, I mean,
morning.
if you
and
see
say, "It won't look that
I know
way."
that, but I mean, like a concentrated effort, not just in one area, but, you know, throughout the whole city, make it all.
Well, our commitment in terms of the land development regulations within the RAC, this is where we start.
Okay.
We're gonna start here, but ultimately, what we learn and what we gain from that is going to also then drive the rest of the code for the entire city. So we will learn from this and expand on this, but what we wanted to try to do is to really make significant progress. And to Mr. Smith's point, what happens in a lot of communities is that you spend a lot of time doing a lot of planning and a lot of studies, and ultimately things don't ever come to fruition, and people get very frustrated, and I understand that. So what we determined to do here is to take, you know, kind of a chunk of the area and begin to do some things within that area, especially in light of what we know about the possibility, the very high probability of commuter rail, taking the corridors that are already activated and basically starting there. And after we get that underway, we will then expand our effort to, you know, adopt that code that will go further. So that's our methodology.
You had a question?
As far as those complete streets, can you name a street which is worse than Northeast 14th Avenue?
Northeast 14.
No, I could not.
Yes.
Right now, as it is under construction.
Thank you.
But, however, this is what I'll say. When it's all said and done, it will be one that we would have addressed, specifically the drainage infrastructure, which is a big issue in a coastal community.
Very
So,
big issue.
while everybody wants things to look nice on the surface, we also have to look at what's beneath the surface and why we have the flooding issues and why we have the challenges that we have, because that's also an issue that affects development and redevelopment. If you know that a street gets flooded, and if I own property, if I'm considering a piece of property, that's not one that I'd probably consider.
Here's that young lady.
Would you be able to explain to me, it says the Regional Activity Center.
Yes.
What does that entail?
Okay, the Regional Activity Center, okay, there's, land is sort of regulated in two levels. One is sort of the macro, you know, from the airplane view, and one is what happens on each individual lot. The Regional Activity Center is that overall view of the area that's within that boundary. And that's just the name of the land use that it's given. But an activity center, it's, you know, the name is supposed to mean something too. So the Regional Activity Center is really intended to become that vibrant, active, mixed-use district. I'm looking at Christy if she wants to jump in, but, you know, she should give me a sign if I say something wrong. You know, it's not really, I guess, downtown, because Hallandale, you know, your intersection of Main and Main right now is 2 gas stations, but, you know, it's really meant to become that sort of town center, city center area. And that's the name of the activity center. And as an activity center, it's got all the uses in it. It's got residential, it's got retail, it's got restaurants, commercial, parks, your civic institutions, your city hall is here, your library, your cultural center, all of those different uses that are required, you know, to have a rich daily life. And so that's sort of, that's sort of the idea behind the activity center. Instead of saying commercial is here and multifamily is here and, you know, restaurants are over here, it's really saying, like, we're going to have all this in this area, and, you know, we're going to figure out exactly the best way to make that happen to the highest possible outcome.
Because I see that a major chunk of that is the northwest area.
Right here, yes.
And the northwest area does have the regional activity processes already going on.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to find out is this plan about beautification or modification?
I would say modification, to be fair, but I'm trying to get to the, okay. So here's a more technical view of that regional activity center. So anything that is this color, which you can see it goes up into Foster Road and along Pembroke. I guess there's a little hole in the donut there. Is that right? Okay, so it's really the Foster Road corridor, Pembroke Road, and then the area that you see here. The red outline is the area that is basically being modified under this effort. So the northwest neighborhood, is it north? We have a Northwest Historic District where I live, so I was afraid I was going to use the wrong word. This area is not the focus of changing right now, probably because it is a neighborhood that is largely intact, maybe needs some infill. Right. So the real focus for this area where the modifications to the land development code are happening are within that red boundary.
Could you tell me what that corridor is from the left red? Yes.
From here, that is the Dixie
Okay.
FEC corridor.
To the left.
This one right here.
Right. What is that corridor?
What edge is that?
Uh-huh.
I'm looking for my glasses.
Second.
Is it second?
Yeah, it would be second.
Okay, let me look. So
West, second.
I'm going to have to blow it up more. Yes, west second. It's west second.
If I could just add a little bit to what Anthony was
Sorry.
saying, because she started by saying that
I can't read it.
land is regulated at 2 levels. There's the macro level, which is the future land use, which is the RAP, which is in this area is deemed appropriate for all these uses that Anthony was describing. The second more focused level,
Thank you.
though, because the future land use doesn't say, okay, well, you can have a building this high there and that high there, or this tall, or, you know, doesn't specify specifically the intensities. That's what the code does, the land development regulation. So it's more specific. I just wanted to clarify that the RAP definition isn't changing within
Right.
the red area. It's
Right.
just those specific instructions on what happens on a lot by lot or a block by block basis.
So the second, and thank you for the explanation, the Second Avenue
Right
from
here.
the Second Avenue corridor east is a part of the modification.
Yes.
So it's sort of going to be included with, over Dixie Highway into the east side,
Right.
northeast side of the city.
Right.
And that whole modification is gonna be multi-use?
No, and that is a very good point. Thank you for saying that. Because an area is a mixed-use district, doesn't mean that every single parcel is vertically mixed. Every single parcel is not a store with residential and office. There's a lot of that can happen, but it means that the uses within the district as a whole are mixed, which means there is a small area of single family right in here that may stay single family because it's a strong couple of streets and it compatibly transitions into a neighborhood. There's others that are duplexes in here. So mixed uses also happen sort of horizontally across the land as well. And the edges, whether it's going into this neighborhood or into the northwest neighborhood, how that intensity level transitions into single family homes is really important. And so that is part of this as well.
So the mixed-use district doesn't mean every building is gonna be retail on the ground floor, office and residential. It means you could have single family with the corner store. You know, that's allowed within the district.
Maybe.
You can get to different
Yeah.
things. And the red line is there on Second because that's just where the RAP future land use was defined. And we weren't here for that, but I'm guessing because when you go further west, it's predominantly neighborhood. You know, it's not in transition. This
Christie's
area
nothing.
between, you know, there's some commercial frontage along Dixie, but the area between Dixie and US 1, I mean, it's kind of in transition.
You know, as a long-term resident of northwest area, I lived through modifications from the Second Avenue to the Dixie Highway corridor where the neighborhoods were sort of boxed in by auto shops,
Yes.
all types of, you know, I felt deteriorating businesses, even though it probably was good for the city. What I would have liked to have seen, and I'm quite sure some other citizens, if they attended this meeting, they would probably have wanted to see the Northwest Corridor expanded into residential instead of boxing the Northwest area further in, surrounding multi-use businesses.
Okay.
Because the gentleman has a point. Citizens came to the commission meeting over and over and complained about those auto body, auto storage facilities surrounding the neighborhood because it brought a lot of problems into the neighborhood. And nobody listened. The more complaints, the more t-shirt factories started popping up, and then you had a plastic warehouse that had a problem. It was even a problem with the air for a minute. And then you had the auto body centers steadily popping up with all of the fumes from the auto paint, you know, affecting residents. Because if you went into that Second Avenue corridor, there are a lot of older residents, older citizens that live along that corridor. And some of them, some of their family have actually moved them out of there simply because they cannot live in that area anymore.
They didn't expect to live next to a t-shirt factory. And so they didn't expect to end up living next to a t-shirt factory, and then that zoning changed, and I understand exactly what you're saying. Okay.
As a long-term citizen, I would have really enjoyed seeing the area expanded more and residential, you know, those auto shops and everything moved further down, further east, and away from the northwest area. I really would have.
I understand.
And I think it would have been beneficial to the community because it just boxes the northwest area in even more.
But I'm also thinking that with a strong code, even if you do have some of those uses, the way that they would impact the residential neighborhood would be different than the way that they impact the residential neighborhood today.
Right.
So we didn't have a good code to be able to say you're required to buffer your operation and have it look aesthetically in a way that it doesn't detract. Because everyone has the same concern. You know, if you're a property owner, you want nice property around you because you don't want your property values to go down. But at the same time, if you're a business owner, you have the right to have your business. So I think that what we try to do is strike a balance where the business owner can operate, but that it doesn't negatively impact the residential property owner. And we do that by having a code that defines how the uses look and where certain elements of that business are, so that it doesn't have a negative impact to the residential property owner that may be next to it or across the street from it.
Well, theoretically, that sounds very attractive. Realistically, it's
Right.
going to be,
Well,
you know, the
Right.
proof in the pudding.
Sure.
So
Right.
I
And that is,
I applaud the effort.
I would
That's a-
just add that, I mean, look, and I'm not picking on Hallandale Beach, but cities have made a lot of mistakes over the years. You know, not just Hallandale Beach, but, you know, where I live, where I'm from in Miami. And so, you know, it takes generations to learn, like, the effects that you have on the value of a community or the cohesiveness of a community. So those things are hard to undo, but it's possible to undo them. For a variety of reasons. I won't get into all here, but like gas stations or environmental issues, things like that. So I think that if there's an understanding of the direction that, say, a commercial corridor wants to go over time, you know, there are methods and things that can be put in place, techniques, to start to transition those corridors into something that's less toxic, say, in the future.
but I think honestly, you've pointed out the area that has the trickiest compatibility situation. Absolutely. And that's one that we'll look at and do what we can to improve it.
I'm all for
Right.
development. I'm all for city metropolitan building, but it seems that there's always a negative impact to citizens. And,
Right.
and you know, we're the ones that come here and we submit our concerns, and the plans are never drawn or created around those concerns. It's almost like those concerns are consistently violated. And I'm encouraged by what it appears is going to happen. And I just, you
Right.
know, I'm prayerful that it does happen where the citizen concerns are no longer violated, but that there are stronger codes
Right.
in place to clean up some of the environmental issues that certain citizens have had to deal with for quite some time.
And I think it's important that there's this forum to voice that, because the document that we're writing, you know, most of it is going to affect when somebody comes in and builds something and does something new. But you have the tool of the CRA, which has the ability to maybe help with some retrofitting, or, you know, and so there's, you know, this is a joint effort between the city and the CRA, and, you know, we tend to color outside of our lines anyway, and so, you know, we will definitely look at that to see if it may not be something that the Land Development Code can fix until something changes, but there may be something else that can be done to try to soften those transitions in the meantime. And we'll definitely pay careful attention to that corridor that you've pointed out.
I'm encouraged with the rezoning. I know that you mentioned rezoning,
Right.
redistricting. I'm encouraged by that. I really would like to see that, but for the benefit of the citizen,
Right.
not necessarily the business, because citizens have a right to live where they want to live.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, yes, sir.
How do you plan to address the auto businesses that are along West Dixie? So just say, for instance, you're trying to lure private investors to come in and put up a mixed-use facility. You know, I don't see too many of them wanting to do that across from an auto shop. The same problem that she just addressed will be the same problem that you'll have to address with the new investment. So how do you plan to circumvent that? Because they have a right to be there.
They have a right, and honestly, if you say that no more of those can come in here, what tends to happen is the guys that are there are locked down because they don't have anywhere else to go, and so you never get rid of them. You know, so that's something else too. And plus, we all have to have our cars fixed at some, you know, things like that. I mean, those uses is a big city, and they serve a purpose there. So we will look at that. I can tell you that the CRA is taking an active role in actually trying to introduce a mixed-use development there, and the fire station is also moving up there to try to provide a level of stability. So there's making some strategic efforts where they can control the property and try to welcome in a different type of tenant. In terms of the code, I think what we would have to look at is, you know, and these types of uses are tricky in lots of communities, is what techniques have been effective in having them put their best face forward. But really, I think the strongest part on Dixie is that transition back into when it's backing up against somebody's house, or it's on the same street as somebody's house a few doors down, and what can be done to make that as harmonious as possible until the uses change or upgrade. And whether there's another area of the city where those types of uses would be encouraged or welcomed eventually to move to. And then it probably becomes brownfield, and then there's grants to try to make things happen with that. So, there's a whole sort of, unfortunately, city building takes a really long time, and it takes us a while to learn, when something that we thought would work didn't work, or, so I can give you, examples that are a lot less concerning than auto body, where trying to think that every building would be mixed use in some communities that are not here have resulted in the ground floor being papered over for years and years and years on the bottom of new buildings because we put too much retail into downtowns. It wasn't supportable. Needed to be able to be office. Needed to be able to be something else. So these things take a long time, but we're learning from them as we go.
Just everything Anthony said is right. But I'll just say that,
That's really the argument on the way home.
Experience with this though up north regarding one of these train station TOD areas. The town of Jupiter, they have a train station that's supposed to go right next to their medical center, their hospital.
Trains coming.
Which is great because it's a big employer, et cetera. However, just adjacent to that is their industrial district. And, we worked with them for the better part of a year, identifying, really taking the code and testing it and developing it to show what the code would yield in that area. And then, as Anthea said, once you put a moratorium on uses and they're already there, they're kind of like, well, we're in. Now there's no competition. The flip side of that, though, is that if I got a one-story carburetor shop that's not meeting 9 out of 10 health codes, and it's not retaining its water on site, and it's not hooked up to water and sewer, and it's got a lot of issues like that. And yet now you're illustrating for me what I could do, which might be a bigger mixed-use building, part of a medical facility. There are other ways to go about this. There are development strategies. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but you can kind of appeal to the greed
Yes.
or the desires, the
We are
future
capitalists.
potential of property. So redevelopment is very tricky business, but it can happen in different ways. There's a lot of tools.
You don't have to be punitive
Right.
in order to get.
It's not all stick, it's carrot.
Sometimes you can say, look at what you could have, and that really now becomes much more attractive than telling me what you can't have. And that's, again, we're not gonna go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow morning and it's gonna look,
Kick everybody out.
the way that we want it to
Can't
look.
do that.
This is a process, but it's a very necessary first step.
I guess kind of what everybody, it sounds like you're saying is what we have that's existing here that is already a problem for us as residents. Is there going to be maybe grants or something that can be given to those business owners?
Those
or
exist.
something that can make their businesses just as attractive as the new things that you all want to develop, but allow us to still feel comfortable as residents with smelling bread all night long?
Oh my gosh, I would eat all the time.
Everybody knows that City of Hallandale. But, I mean,
Those
I happen to live across from it, and, it's annoying.
Those exist now. Those opportunities through the CRA.
But is
we
there
have-
a way to enforce those opportunities?
So you're telling me that I have to force my daughters to take, I mean, that's the extent of the example.
Only if they're gonna violate someone else's rights.
Well,
You know,
and that's,
and I should have a right to be able to look out my door and not see huge trucks and people who work on cars.
but
driving
here's,
in the
here's,
street.
here's, and I think Dana pointed this out. There's a way to be very, very effective in enforcing what your code allows or requires you to have. So in other words, you should have an enclosed dumpster, you should have a certain size fence. There are certain things that are in the code that are required. And that is something through our code compliance effort that we can do today.
Right.
Now, what we do in terms of our effort and how we try to marry the carrot and the stick is that we go out and we say to the property owner, look, here's a warning notice. You have a condition on your property that is not compliant with the code. You have X number of days to correct it. But then we also say, here's a program through the CRA that can help you to address that code condition.
Yes.
And what I try to do, because I wear two hats, is through the CRA be able to say, not only do we want you to correct that code condition, but let's look at the rest of the property. How do we make this really much nicer beyond just enclosing that one dumpster? So it's not just a, microscopic approach to that one condition. We want to take that opportunity to now say, how do we fix that one property? And our goal and our hope is if we fix that one property, the property next door will say, well, wait a minute, I want to make my property look nicer because now my neighbor's property looks nicer than mine. And so that's how one way that redevelopment begins, through the existing mechanisms that
Do
you
you
have now.
find it's harder to do that if the people who own those buildings are not residents or
Yes.
of the state of Florida?
Yes, it is absolutely difficult because as long as they're collecting rent,
Yeah.
they really don't
It's
care.
tricky.
And then they basically say to the tenant, it's your responsibility and I'm going to charge you for whatever that is. But in many respects, if they're not invested in the community, they don't have a real stake in that process. And that is an absolute true statement. It's very difficult to do.
There's a lady, okay, you, but then there's a lady in the back that hasn't had a chance yet. So we'll do him first and then we're going to come to you. Okay.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The upper portion of that area there, I would say 40% of the area, Mardi Gras,
Okay.
Kelly Chevrolet, all the way to 3rd Street. I think it's probably zoned properly, ready for development, and nothing happens. We let developers come in, buy up a property, and sit on it, it's a disgrace, the way it looks. Now, what is the plan for that area?
Well, that area is being looked at as part of this effort as well. I can tell you that, there was the existing mobile home that was torn down, and then the project never happened that was supposed to come in there. That's just south of Mardi Gras. You have Mardi Gras, and there's an existing mobile home park, and then there was another one that was purchased and demolished, and there was an approved plan, but we just went through kind of a shock of real estate market nationally, not just in Hallandale, and so things were on pause for a while. That property has, the one where they've already cleared the homes, has recently changed hands. That developer has started meeting with the city. They're in the room, so something should start happening on that piece, the parcel that was already cleared.
And they have until, 2015? They have until 2015 to move forward on what they have authorization to develop. So there is a finite time frame in which something has to happen.
There.
We have to allow for, they have the right until that time.
About Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is what I have heard from people who know that they make so much money, they don't want to do anything. They're very happy to have what they have, and no matter what the city says.
Well, we had the opportunity to speak with the Mardi Gras general manager, and they've been here a very long time, and they are financially in a very good position. And so I don't know that there is any immediate long-term redevelopment goals, but we did talk about the entries into the city on Pembroke and the other access points to their property, and they were very receptive to the idea that if the city was going to do something with the streets, that they would actually be willing to start improving their perimeters and their borders as a partner with the city or the CRA, depending on which organization it is. So, we're reaching out to those large property owners that are in this area to see, if they're interested in helping. And to be honest, they were very receptive. A large-scale redevelopment plan, however, is certainly not something that's coming in the foreseeable future, and that has less to do with zoning and more to do with the state gambling laws than we can affect here. But they were actually very receptive to improving the perimeter of their property.
And the one thing that I would want everyone to understand, that if you have a property that is not the most aesthetically desirable, but if it is within the current code, there's very little that the city can do to force that person to change it. It's almost like my house, somebody may not like the color, but if it's not a code violation, it's my choice to be able to keep it that color. So we have certain limitations as a government as to what we can do. What we try to do is to really envelope that with our efforts to be able to do the things on the public side that hopefully will stimulate the private side to do it.
Now, the
There's a
big
lady in the
work
back.
property, let's talk about that a minute.
The big-
Well, can we
there-
go ahead and
There's a
take-
lady in the back who
Yeah.
hasn't had a chance yet, so
Yes.
we'd like to hear.
Yes, I have interest for project CVS in the corner Hallandale Boulevard and Three Island Boulevard. Do you know that
How-
just meeting February 13th?
The
Yes, ma'am. What's
CVS?
question?
There's
It's
a-
outside of this area, but go ahead.
Yeah, what
What's the question?
status of this?
The status of the
status
CVS?
I think you want to talk about that real quick?
So we met on February 13th regarding that project, and so they're working through the development agreement with the city attorney's office and city manager's office. Hopefully, we'll go to planning and zoning board in April.
And the opinion of the city, it's good project there, right? I need a city opinion, not the people opinion. Question is that so many people talk about this, even to move Walmart from this part, and you put CVS more. It's like overweight for this project, no?
Well, I
Because
think,
Walmart is a beautiful place in Hallandale where you can make $1 million.
Yes.
And only Walmart made this, not city. After that, if we're talking about the business project to develop the Hallandale, I'm
The-
not
the
here 2
question-
years, I don't know too much history. There is,
Right.
if you put in a corner CVS, you believe how much traffic will be there and what will be in these two corners, Walmart and CVS.
and we have definitely looked at that as a traffic concern. Part of the development process requires a developer to be able to do traffic studies and determine how traffic is going to be impacted and how they, as a developer, will mitigate or how they will address the traffic. You asked a question,
What
though.
is something with big developer, Walmart in CVS area, bring the entertainment center.
But here's-
Have
but here's-
more money there
but
and
here's the-
activity for the person.
Here's the real challenge, and here's the question you asked earlier, and I think it's a good question. Does the city believe it's a good project? And there's a term in zoning which is called highest and best use. Is that the highest and best use for that site? I would say, and this is just a personal reaction, probably not. But if a person who owns the property, can they have the right to develop what they want to? By law, they can. So our job as a city is to say, if you have the right to develop what you want to develop, and as long as we put the conditions on you to develop it in the way that we want you to develop it, then we have to allow that. Now, even
But
within
in
that,
this zoning, you do opposite in this zoning.
no, but we actually put certain conditions on the way that the CVS would look, the orientation of the building, the exits to address the traffic. So from the city side, there are a lot of conditions that we impose upon the developer, but, we can't tell someone who owns a property, you can't do what the law gives you the right to do. That we don't have. I think a lot of people overstate the power that government has. We have some power, but we don't have, it's not a, I forget the term now, you don't have that, supreme or
Dictatorship,
sovereign
yeah.
authority to be able to do that.
Yeah.
What I want to update, because
Daniel,
I was-
on March 26th, planning and zoning will be here with CVS.
CVS, okay.
March 26th.
March 26th, at 1:30 here.
No?
Not necessarily, but.
Not necessarily, well, they think so, CVS thinks so.
We'll see.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
A couple of years ago, I went to a meeting in Aventura. They had this grand scale model of the whole corridor
Mm-hmm.
completely transformed. They had Ferris wheels, they had buildings, and it went from, I think, 163rd Street all the way to Pembroke Road. I didn't understand
Is that Gulf
what
Street?
that model, how that model impacted the city of Hallandale. But this corridor for the Regional Activity Center appears to be the city of Hallandale's part linking up to this large model. So my question to you is this a part of that large plan that is a part of Aventura and the city of Miami? Is that involving the city of Hallandale? Is that the city of Hallandale's part in that project?
Very simply stated, I don't know the answer to that because I didn't see the presentation that you saw. We, as a city, only address things that are within our city. The one thing that we did address in this approach is that the FEC corridor, which is as Anthea mentioned, the anticipated commuter rail, that is something that we know is going to happen, and we have a high probability that a station will be within the city. But to address whether or not there's a larger redevelopment concept that transcends over multiple cities, I couldn't honestly tell you because I didn't see it, so I don't know what was.
If it was out of the MPO or who
Where
was
did
it?
you see it? I would love to see it.
Yeah.
Highway, and I saw where a lot of demolition was going on, and I said, I don't know how they were going to do it, but then as you travel Dixie Highway, and Dixie Highway will be a 2-lane street. I saw that, and this just reminded me of that model.
It's based also specifically the area south of Ives Dairy, where they cleared out that entire area.
All of that, all of that.
Because ideally, and I've mentioned this at the South Florida FEC coastal meetings, including the ones in Aventura, one of the things that the big concern in Aventura was, and it's a concern I've expressed to many people here, is while we want to have the transportation, part of the problem is when you're on a train, you actually want to get someplace, and what you don't want to do is have a situation where between 163rd Street and, say, Sheridan, you have 8 stops in 5 minutes. Because just as soon as you're leaving the station, you're slowing down to get to the next one. And part of the big problem that's going to occur in Aventura is deciding whether or not they want to actually have it as close as possible to Aventura Mall, or as I suggested, having it diagonal where Dixie Highway is, because then basically even with the Lehman Parkway, because then you can have a kiss and ride sort of thing on the east side where people can be dropped off. You can have some parking on the west side, which is on Dixie Highway, and you can have retail components all the way along and encourage the transit-oriented corridor all the way down. Because there were plans for developing the area just south of Ives Dairy, and then the developer went belly up, which is why that is, and I've taken lots of pictures of that.
That's
I mean,
the
literally,
Ferris wheel.
that is like 3/4 of a mile, and there's just nothing between 26th and Dixie Highway, and that's a great location. And theoretically, it would make the most sense for them to have their station there as opposed to Aventura Hospital, because I've got experience using a metro near a hospital, and that does not usually work out very well.
Yes, sir, you had a question.
Yes, my question is, with this master plan and the train station and all of the other new buildings you guys are coming up with, is there a proposal on the opportunity for jobs, say for the city? And in that question, will these jobs be a reflection of the community?
Okay, so multiple questions, none of which have to do with this. So let's separate the two. The city, with respect to job opportunities, has an ordinance that it passed, which is entitled a community benefit plan. Every development that comes into the city that meets a certain threshold has to provide a community benefit plan commitment to the city prior to its approval. That,
Really?
yes.
And, okay, as you're saying that, I mean, is there like a number?
Every project has a different commitment because of the nature of the project. They may say, we will commit to a percentage of our total development cost to be a community benefit plan. Now, a component or one of the components of the community benefit plan is local jobs, and by local I mean Hallandale Beach residents.
Right.
So that is one of the components. The real challenge that we've had is to be able to link the residents who are looking for work that have specific skill sets and matching them to the developments that are happening and what their needs are. So for instance, if you're doing a development that is construction and the developer says, I need carpenters or I need electricians that are certified, The challenge that the city has had is being able to find Hallandale Beach residents that meet that criteria to be able to provide them as a resource to that developer. So we are working on a model to try to help facilitate that, but that already exists in all of the developments that meet a particular threshold of $1 million or more, because that's at the only time that it makes sense financially.
Okay, so what is the avenue of the residents of Hallandale seeking out the opportunities that you say are out there, but in layman's terms, you're not being feared by the residents of Hallandale? What's the link that we can say where there's 10 jobs and I would like to try out for those 10 jobs? What's that link?
Well, right now, that's what I'm saying. There's a gap because a developer has a responsibility to be able to identify the local residents, and they do it through job fairs. They do it through their own outreach efforts. What we would like to see is a much more concerted effort. Other communities have used kind of a workforce one model where there's a job placement center where residents that are looking for work go there, and then they will identify potential placements for the person depending on their skill sets. So we're working on something like that. We're not there yet, but we're working on something like that right now. It's up to the developer to do their own outreach and identify local residents. But we recognize that we need to do a better job of facilitating that as a city effort.
My last comment on that, how can we make that better? I mean, I hear what you're saying. We're working on it. We could be working on it till 2020.
No, but this is something that's going to happen like within the next few months. Right now, as I said, the developers have that responsibility. We it's a very difficult question because what happens is you find yourself as a local government determining what role do you really play. And are we as a local government to be in the role of being a facilitator of job placement, or do we leave that up to the private market? That's a larger conversation for another day and time. But that is something that right now, because of the ordinance that we have put in place, we require that of developers. And what we have found, the feedback that we've gotten from developers is we want to comply with community benefit, but we can't identify the local individuals to be able to meet these positions that we have open. So because of that situation, we are now developing a model that helps to facilitate that. And I couldn't tell you exactly when it's going to happen because it's new to us. So we have to develop the model and how it's actually going to work. But right now, if you want to give me a call, it's probably the easiest thing. And I'll tell you, these are the projects that are going on.
Okay.
And then the contact person there will tell you, this is what I'm looking for.
Okay.
So that's probably the easiest thing that we can do.
You just answered the question.
Okay, good. I should have started with that.
Can I just say something, not specific to that, but I think it's important to remember though, since 2006, 2007, nothing's been going on. And I don't need to tell everybody that, but it's been very, very slow, especially in development, especially in construction, trades and things. So we work all over from Miami up to Vero Beach and out west in the Glades, et cetera. And we sense the frustration everywhere. So the good news is that, as Anthea mentioned earlier, there's a serious upswing that's occurring. And kudos to the city and the CRA for getting some of these tools in place before things get out of control. And then you do have these links and these development regulations in place before things get fired up again.
As you call the bigger property on the corner of Atlantic Shore and US 1, when they asked for $440,000 abatement of the building fines, they came out with a beautiful rendering of a project they're going to do, look like something from Bourbon Street in New Orleans. Remember that picture?
That's what it's called, Bourbon Street.
Bourbon Street. Can you tell me what happened? Was that actually a plan or just a ruse to get the $440,000?
Well, I don't know that they ever submitted an application to develop that. The Big Herbs property, do you remember if they ever submitted that, Chrissy? They did not submit that. But I don't recall. I'd have to look to see what the condition in terms of that lien mitigation was, because I don't recall. I think it was probably before my time, but I'm not sure. I do remember seeing that rendering, and if in fact there was a condition to that lien mitigation.
It was not. Okay. That's what I suggested to the city commission, to use that and say that, give it to them as a part of a development agreement.
Right.
Maybe do site development or something. City commission just gave them the money, you have a $440,000 picture in your possession.
Wow.
I was gonna say, just to follow up on Chava's point, that's a very good point, because it was great to hear that you guys have had a recent discussion with the folks at Mardi Gras, but for those of you who don't live here, it's important, and/or weren't working here yet, it's important to know that the Mardi Gras was not real cooperative with the city when the master plan was first done. They keep very close mouth, and as Chava might have been saying a couple minutes ago, part of the thing that came out after Florida East Coast Realty discussed that at the city commission meeting was the fact that the Mardi Gras said they didn't know anything about it and that they had their own plan for having a hotel right there. And that gets into the lack of, frankly, you don't want to even say cooperation, because clearly the city could use 2 more quality hotels. No one disputes that. I'm in favor. I'm against a lot of development, but that would obviously make sense. But on the other hand, you can't have them right next to each other. That sort of defeats the whole purpose, to have nothing and then to have 2 things that are cutting each other's throat. The larger suggestion I was just going to make, though, is the Kelly Chevrolet property, the large block area, specifically you were referencing that planned project on 3rd and US 1, as well as that 1 block area on Hallandale Beach Boulevard between 4th and either 5th and 6th, but it's the really large one on the north side of the street. I think it's really important for the next couple of meetings that you at least contact the owners of those properties and say, listen, we don't know, maybe you didn't like the way things got run here before, maybe you were right, but we need you to actually be engaged in what's going on here and not to have excuses for why you don't know what the community actually thinks should be happening in the city. Everyone can come up with places that ought to exist in the city that don't exist, where you actually have to leave the city in order to take advantage of something. These properties are on main streets where, granted, the traffic is terrible, but the roads already exist and people are already familiar with them. And it seems important to me that also, before the next meeting like this, that we need to be using those electronic message boards that we see for PAL events, but apparently for little else, as well as those sandwich boards, and frankly, make some flyers and put them on the city transit buses, so people who don't normally, frankly, come to city commission meetings and things actually can find out about what's going on. Because there's, like I said earlier, there's lots of people in this town who have ideas to contribute, but oftentimes in the past they felt that they were just going to come up for 3 minutes and then nothing was going to happen. It does seem to me, more than I thought when I first came here, that this can actually be a genuine effort that actually is going to get the community involved. And I'm all for that. But there are large aspects of the community that are, frankly, a little shy of getting involved because they